Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first Metaplanet Madness live spaces event. I am one of your co-hosts. I go by the name Peter Duan, aka BTC Bullrider, and with me is my other co-host. He goes by the Twitter handle ClimbThatLadder or actually Climber. Climb, welcome. How do you feel about our very first episode together?
Fantastic. I'm excited.
Perfect. Well, if you don't mind, could you pull up the presentation and we'll just walk everyone through what we have planned for today. Perfect. So, as everybody knows, this is the very first episode. And the first episode is all about our investment thesis and why both Climb and I are so giga bullish about this investment. Next slide, please. Just some housekeeping notes for everyone. Number one, this is never financial advice. These are just two fellow Bitcoiners, fellow investment nerds, just talking about one particular investment, and that is Metaplanet. And number two, because we're Bitcoiners, at least most of us on this call, we have this famous phrase, don't trust, verify. So this ties in very well with rule number one, which is this is never financial advice. Third, we do plan to host this on a weekly live basis first on X, and it will be redistributed on YouTube. The YouTube channel is called Bull Standard. And the audio version of this will be on Spotify. Now, we encourage everybody to come to the live one because the benefit of coming to the live one is that you can ask questions in the chat. And if and when we have time at the very end, we will select some questions that we, both Climb and I, will answer. And finally, we appreciate your time with us, and we greatly would appreciate it if you like and retweet our content if you find this valuable. Perfect. Next slide, please. So without further ado, I want to bring on my co-host, ClimbThatLadder, to introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm ClimbThatLadder. I guess I started with this handle sometime last year, mostly with MicroStrategy content, now known as strategy.
Perfect. Yeah, why don't you go to the next slide? Because you've written, I believe, a thread, and we're not going to read the thread for everyone. We encourage everyone to go and look up this thread yourself. But for those who are curious about Climb's background, he laid it out in pretty good detail. But for those who cannot read it right now, can you kind of briefly walk us through your personal life a little bit and how you got here?
Yeah. I grew up with, normal family doing normal family things, and we moved all over the United States, and no college or anything. I grew up fairly poor, have some stories there, but was definitely hungry for more, and joined the Navy as a nuclear electrician on the West Coast carrier, and got into investing. I mean, I always thought about it, but I didn't know much about it. I got into it in maybe 2008 or so, interested in day trading and options and stuff like that. Learned to count cards, did that for a very short time, but I did it a little bit. It's pretty easy, actually. And let's see, went from there. So I had some luck in 2009 when everything kind of bounced back. I looked at like 100 options. I picked the one I liked the best, like 100 different stocks, sorry, and picked the one I liked the best, and it went up like 8-fold in 2 weeks or something like that. I looked at charts, intuition, whatever, and I went for it. So, and then I doubled down and lost it all. So I'm not sure if there's any lessons there. Probably not, right? So after that, it's been a lot of up and down. Got a job in a steel mill, worked there about 12 years, retired last year. And that's a huge portion of it, I guess.
Nice. So it sounds as if despite the fact that you don't have that traditional finance background, you were always very analytical, love numbers, and had some ups and downs with investing, but you kept with it, and through your persistence and your drive to always learn more, you were able to finally retire last year. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Perfect. I believe we have some slides where you show, your track record. I think, again, we are Bitcoiners. We like to we like to verify and not trust right away. So why don't you talk a little bit about this very ridiculous looking chart that I see here?
Yeah. So this chart mostly shows, well, really kind of it ended up being 100x. So very late 2022, I saw MicroStrategy. I thought about the options pricing. It's kind of weird. I was actually on a flight to Iceland, and I don't travel much, but I was actually on the plane waiting to take off, and I bought a bunch of options. So, and I'm not, I mean, I can be impulsive, but like I was very confident in this bet. It seemed like 75 to 90% chance I would get at least a 10-to-1 payout. The options were crazy low. The chart was beaten down. It had been down for a long time. And I bought some January 2025 options in late 2022. Mm-hmm. And the thesis was basically, if Bitcoin goes even to something like 42,000, it was sitting at like 16,000. If it goes halfway up to its all-time high from there, then the options would at least 10x. And I thought, okay, well, that's going to happen. Like, I'm confident that's going to happen. So, I could say the options were mispriced, but really the stock and the options were mispriced. And so that carried me into early 2024. I should have just held on to those because I probably would have done a little bit better overall. But I got rid of them kind of early 2024 for a lot of profit, and then got heavy into posting about MicroStrategy and stuff around the October last year timeframe. And that's when I went even heavier, did some shorter term stuff, some longer term stuff. And then here is kind of where it was like a day or so of the top in November that I saw everyone in the group, in the community on X, just posting like their gain picks, but it's like unrealized gains. Like you haven't locked it in, and you're up like, 1,000% or whatever in like a week. And people were way too excited about it. And I just thought, okay, like, is this just going to be sunshine and rainbows, like short term for everyone? Like this, it doesn't work. Somebody has to make, somebody has to make, somebody has to lose, and it's not going to just stay up. So I locked in a bunch of money. I still could have played it a lot better. But I like playing both sides. I like being very bullish when people are bearish, and the other way too. So that's kind of evidence of that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I observed right away. Usually on X, there's, during bear times, there's a lot of complaining. During bull times, there's a lot of God candles and bull posting. So it is very rare to actually find the signal amongst the noise. And I quickly found that you are someone who likes to post results. Put your money where your mouth is. And that's how I found you initially. So I've always been very impressed on how you were able to stay relatively emotionless through your trading. And it's a testament to you that you've been doing this for well over a decade and have some clearly really good results to show for it. Would you like to show some of the other slides that you have here as well?
Yeah, so I mean, everyone that's on here knows, of course, that I've kind of switched recently. So I'm in Metaplanet. I have nothing else right now. It's Metaplanet and cash. So about 60-40 if people care. But I started buying, I think April 25th was Friday, a couple of weeks ago, and I started buying. I got about 800,000 shares then. Bought some more Sunday night from Tokyo, and now I'm at 3 million. So that's the share count I have. It's probably going to stay exactly there because I can't go to another round number. So I think I'm kind of stuck there.
3 million shares. I mean, that I think that might make you as one of the largest independent shareholders of Metaplanet. So yeah, we're very impressed with that number, and you're someone that put your money where your mouth is. So yeah, that's why I'm very excited to partner up with you. So guys, my name is Peter Duan. I go by, again, the BTC Bullrider. just a little overview on who I am and how I got here as well. Next slide, please. So, let me take a step back, right? So I'm from an immigrant family, and usually immigrant families from a small, high school level, they say, work really hard, go to a good university so that you'll get a good job, right? Well, unfortunately, that wasn't the case. I did go to a good university. I went to UCLA, but I studied environmental science. And the rationale at the time was, the price of oil and gas was $100 a barrel. And so I thought by the time I graduated, the green revolution was going to come and I was going to work in the sustainability industry. Well, unfortunately, that didn't happen. And I didn't realize it's because I didn't do internships throughout my college times. So fast forward, when I graduated, I really couldn't find a time, I couldn't find a job. Matter of fact, I vividly remember that Red Cross offered me a $400 a month stipend. They literally couldn't use the word salary simply because it was below minimum wage. And so, of course, I was very butthurt and kind of pissed about the whole entire experience. But I realized, hey, I wanted two things in my life. I wanted A, make money, and B, make my money work for me. So I thought, well, what was the best way to do that? The best way to do that was to break into Wall Street. And so, long story short, I was able to, break into Wall Street by working at some of the biggest firms. My very first firm that I worked for was a firm called Cantor Fitzgerald. As you know, that is our, the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald is Howard Lutnick. He is now deeply involved in the Trump administration. Over there, I did something called CMBS, or commercial mortgage-backed securitization. And over there, closed a bunch of deals and then moved over to a non-traded REIT company where we created financial products to be wholesaled through financial advisors. That was a very good experience simply because it was really nice to see how to create financial products, how it was distributed through the wholesale channel, but ultimately how did a financial product like that fail? That project failed simply because the people who made it got greedy. For every $100 you gave us, $10 evaporated right away. 7% went to the financial advisor who got a sales commission, and 3% went back to us. So as you can see, during the recovery phase, this is sustainable, but it was actually through the top where the entire industry collapsed. So that was a great experience. It was unfortunate that industry imploded, but it was also a good learning experience. Then I moved over to an S&P 500 company called HealthPeak. HealthPeak is they call it the big three of healthcare real estate. Over there, I worked directly with the CEO and the CFO over in the investor relations department, and I worked intimately with the FP&A team. Next slide, please. Most recently, I was a wealth advisor. Matter of fact, I recently appeared, in the Wall Street Journal, and we'll talk about that later. As I was able to learn how to use social media, and also something that was not included in this was the fact that I temporarily lived abroad for 3 years. During COVID, and during that time, I had my own investment coaching business, where I, took my own self-taught learning finance experience, packaged it up with the help of a co-founder, and then taught retail investors how to sell. So, taking all my traditional finance experience, I'm able to distill down, knowledge into bite-sized, understandable chunks. And also during these last 5 years, I learned digital marketing, which helped with me growing this social media account very quickly. Next slide, please. So speaking of which, we're numbers people. And I guess what I do now is, due to the success of my social media growth, I was able to gain quite a bit of traction. So here are some of the numbers. I know it's a bit small to see, but there's a kind of a summary in the side where it showed that I started in, call it mid to late October of last year. And just a month into me tweeting, it caught the attention of the Wall Street Journal. Since then, call it about 7.5 months, I was able to gain 16.4 thousand followers with a 3% engagement rate, which are pretty good numbers. And so because of the results of this, I am fortunate enough to have a lot of Bitcoin companies reach out to me because they realize that with all these new people coming up left and right, creating Bitcoin companies, it's really hard to stand out amongst the noise. So since I have that traditional finance background, but also know digital marketing well, I'm able to combine both to help Bitcoin treasury companies. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's a little bit about us. Hopefully that didn't come off as too much bragging for us, but rather we want to show that, A, we put our money where our mouth is, and B, we have a track record that hopefully, is useful for you guys. So let's dive into the meat of today's content, which is, go back by one slide. The meat of this content is, the 4 investment themes of why Climb and I are deep believers in this investment. So theme number 1 is ultra high growth investment. Theme number 2 is best in class management / execution. Theme number 3 is rabid fan base. And theme number 4 is they're very smart with strategic partnerships and marketing. Climb, you can take it away with ultra high growth right now.
All right. Yeah. So when I considered Metaplanet, which was fairly recently, I mean, it was around a 10 MNAV. So last that I had heard about it, which was a couple of months ago. And I didn't really consider it as an investment last year because I was already parked with MicroStrategy. I already had options there. I already had a play there. And then a couple of weeks ago, I was actually trading CEP, and I thought about parking things there long term because of the potential. And then somebody commented about Metaplanet, and I started looking, and I'm like, well, I thought they were a 10 MNAV, and they're like at like 2.4, 2.8, something like that. And so I decided just to take a little bit of time and look, and I'm like, okay, well, they can 10x their Bitcoin per share from where they're at now. And they're trading under a 3 MNAV. And so that doesn't, that's a huge advantage, a huge discount in my eyes. And it might take enough time for all this to play out for Bitcoin to also 5 or 10x. So that turns into 100x potential. And that's not a stretch, I don't think. So here's a log chart of their Bitcoin holdings. They started April of last year, I believe, with about 100 Bitcoin. They're at like 55 right now. And I mean, that's almost a straight line on a log chart, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, very impressive. Yeah.
Sorry, my mouse pointer. I'll figure that out for episode 2. It's fun though. All right, so growth versus MicroStrategy, because a lot of people are like, well, there's no way it's the same math. It's the same ratio math, dilution and whatever. Well, there's a lot to that I won't have time for, specifically here, but just as a quick ratio of the amount of Bitcoin that's held, you can see obviously they started at 0 and going up from there. They were under 0.1% for a while, and they hit 1% 3 days ago. And my question is, when does this ratio stop climbing? I mean, this speaks to the execution because, I mean, percent-wise, to be catching up to MicroStrategy, obviously there's a smaller play, there's advantages there, and they're working with all the advantages they have. So they're making it work. So anyway, yeah, there's Metaplanet divided by MicroStrategy's Bitcoin holdings. Here's the same thing for Semler. There's a lot of people kind of pitch me on Semler, and not to knock them. This is just how amazing Metaplanet has been executing everything. So, I mean, last year, Semler had like 500 Bitcoin at the time when Metaplanet had about 100. And now that's like flipping. So, I mean, I think soon Metaplanet will probably have about twice of what Semler has, and it'll probably just continue from there. So that's pretty telling chart, I think. Here's the same thing with comparing it to Marathon's holdings. I imagine this is going over 100%. I would guess this is going over 100% within 2 years. So, I mean, it could actually happen in 12 months, but it's pretty crazy how fast this is. And a lot of it's Marathon's MNAV is 1.1, something like that. I think similar is around a 1. So that's a lot of the story, but there's reasons why I think that's the case. So,
Yeah, I'm curious to hear a little bit about why you think is the case. Let me share my thoughts, and then I would love to hear yours. So, in my observation, there are Bitcoin treasury companies popping up left and right. And I see in the comments that some people will be like, well, Peter, like, why do you talk about marketing? And like, why is that even important? Let's just get to the investment, right? I actually think that is a huge missing part that most Bitcoiners and especially Bitcoin treasury companies are not aware of, is the importance of marketing, the importance of community, right? Because attention is the new oil. And so if you don't have a rabid fan base that is constantly talking about it, you're not going to be able to trade above MNAF right now. And you're kind of seeing that through similar as they're trading close to 1. But it is a little bit different from where I see Marathon is, because Marathon is the second largest Bitcoin holdings, but because they're a miner, they have to constantly invest into the mining equipment, which is by nature very dilutionary. So I'm curious to think how you think about it.
Yeah, let's see. Metaplanet is a pure play. So normally I like to ignore attention except to go the other way. If people are, too excited, I go the other way. If people aren't excited enough, then I get into it. And that's like kind of the more broad view of investing. As long as there's a rationale for going one way or the other. Metaplanet is extremely unique in the space in Japan. They don't have any real competition there. They have super low interest rates there, which will be advantages later down the road when they do bonds and things like that. Imagine them doing something similar to the Strike and Strife stuff, but not having to offer, 8 or 10% or whatever. 2 or 3%. It would be pretty crazy. Simon spoke about this a few days ago on stage. So they're very careful about how they dilute and when they dilute, how they buy when they buy Bitcoin. We'll get to some of that later. But yeah, I think that I've underestimated sort of the value of people talking about these companies and the value of new capital coming in, the investor count growing in order to give an extra boost to MNAV, in order to give that, because this isn't about flipping it, pump, dump, whatever, and sell it next week. It's not that at all. What happens is if they can dilute a little bit more at a higher MNAV short term, that provides huge value long term. It totally changes kind of the graph of Bitcoin per share, that trajectory. So even if they just went to like a 5 MNAV for 5 days and they dilute 2 or 3%, that totally changes numbers 2 or 3 years down the line. It has a huge impact. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. So, aside from just wanting to share my views about whatever I'm doing investment wise, there's huge value to shedding a spotlight on this, explaining how it works. People make up their own minds, but a lot of people, didn't know much about Simon until recently. I didn't know who he was until recently, just because I hadn't done any research. So yeah, there's a ton of upside, and I'm excited about it. And a lot of other companies don't quite know what they are. So they're great. The zombie companies are coming on board, and this is just my opinion. It's difficult as investors if something like similar has value, they have potential. Whether they realize it or not is up to investors, kind of giving them that. And if you're going to invest in a medical company, why invest in one that's like totally trading based on Bitcoin price? And if you're going to invest in a Bitcoin company, why invest in something that's less of a pure play? So that's difficult for them. It's a difficult position to be in, but it's great that they have their treasury in Bitcoin, and they'll benefit from that either way. So
Got it. So yeah, we'll definitely dive in into the management. I'll be covering that. But what else do you have in here?
Yeah, let's see. All right, so this is, and I've played around with different models. I'm trying to keep things as simple as possible, kind of as realistic as possible. And I might adjust things in the future, but this is just the kind of super rough, clean curve projected dilution rate, monthly dilution rate that I have for the next 2 years. In April, they did dilute 10%. I think that they've probably been above 10% most of the last few months. So I think these are pretty reasonable numbers. They might actually go over 10% short term. I think they were actually limited to 10% last month, but I think they might go over 10% a little bit short term if they can. So just kind of given that, it gets easier and easier. They don't have to dilute nearly as much as time goes on. I know Dylan's talked a lot about not wanting to squash MNAV and being careful how they dilute and stuff like that. I shared a clip of that kind of earlier. One thing really neat to look at is their historic MNAV. I don't have a chart of it here, but it's up and down and up and down. It doesn't just like dissipate and just lose steam. It recharges, goes up. There's volatility there that's really, really useful to capture. So that's anyway, so that's my just basic assumption of dilution. And I'm just treating this as an ATM. They don't have ATM in Japan. They use something called moving strike warrants, which I can talk about, but I probably can't talk very intelligently about that.
No worries. We'll cover that in the next episode. Let me ask you though, why do you think that the dilution is not going to be held steady, but rather it is going to be, slowly but surely declining over time?
I think that it's really easy I've looked at, it's called the turnover rate or turnover ratio. It's the percentage of volume that's traded on a daily basis. So like if they had 500 million shares and if they trade 50 million shares, that's a 10% turnover rate. And there's something like that, like they're around a 10%. A lot of their competition, MicroStrategy and other companies are more like 5 or 6%. So when you think about the amount of volume and how these new shares get bought by the public, that absorption rate is super important. And I think most people aren't looking at that. So partly because they're a smaller company, it's easier to absorb. They're, 1/100th the size of MicroStrategy. And then the other part of that is the volume. So right now their investor base is growing, and Simon has charts on that, which are really neat to see. Their investing base is growing, but it can only grow, so fast. The volume is really high. It can absorb things, but you don't want to kill the golden goose, and the golden goose is high MNAV. So I think that while I'm sure it won't look exactly like I have the chart, I think that it will dissipate as the company gets larger. And I'm not too worried about that because that's a careful way to do it. It's a good way to keep MNAV high potentially. So, it's just one idea. And if they dilute more than that, if they can manage it and the market tolerates it, then these projections will get, even better. So I've just kind of erred on the side of being conservative there.
Got it. Love to know what this slide is about.
Yeah, so given that dilution rate, I divided it up into sort of 4 different MNAVs, which are listed at the bottom there, 2.75 to 3.5. And this is their projected Bitcoin holdings if all that plays out. So it's pretty crazy. This is a 24-month, 2-year chart, and it shows them hitting around 200,000 Bitcoin conservatively in that time. And the more I look at this, the more I think about it, the more real this seems to me. Now, of course, people ask, well, what if there's a bear market or whatever? And if something like that happens, then, the numbers may look, better in certain parts, worse in other parts or whatever. But I think that this will kind of be the average almost no matter what happens, as long as Bitcoin, goes up and does pretty well. And these companies continue to gain attention, for short term, at least. So I think this will be kind of the average outcome that happens. And yeah, I mean, right now, keep in mind, they have like 5,000, 5,500 Bitcoin. So, this is pretty crazy.
Yeah, when I saw these numbers, I was like, I don't know how they're going to get there, but yeah, I mean, based upon just the 1 year of execution, I say never bet against them.
Yeah, and to go back to this, like, so this dilution rate too, I was like, well, I want to see how many shares this is, and this turns. They currently have a little over 500 million shares, and at the end of this, if it played out this way, it would turn into right at like 2 billion shares. So it's a little bit less than a 4 times over 24 months, which I think is pretty safe for them to do something like that. So you end up with almost 4 times the share count, but think about the ratio there. From 5,000, it's pretty huge. So around 40 to 80 fold or something like that. So when you think about Bitcoin per share multiplying from where it is today, that's the ratio, is that sort of, okay, multiply the share count by 4 and you multiply your Bitcoin holdings by 40 or 50 or 60 or 80. And I tried to go with fairly conservative MNAVs as well. I think that they'll remain higher than MicroStrategy for lots of reasons. And so I had to like lower the numbers for it to not look insane, for it to not look like gladiator bullish, So I mean, I like tried to handicap myself as much as possible here. So if people think these are like bullish charts, I mean they are, but like I tried to go with pretty safe numbers, like
So
diminishing dilution. Yeah.
could you share a little bit of what you think the MNAV is going to be? Like what is the ranges and the assumptions that you put behind these projections?
So there's positive feedback. I view MNAV as having 2 magnets. There's you're being pulled towards one by certain forces. Stagnation, like low energy, is one MNAV. Like no one cares about you, low volume, low interest, or they think you might go bankrupt, or they don't understand the business, or whatever, right? Various reasons why you just kind of like could fall down. That doesn't mean you stay at one forever, but it's hard to climb out of that
Right.
because you can't really accretive dilution your way out of it. So you really need the market to trust you somehow. So it's a difficult thing. So that's one magnet for MNAV. The other magnet mathematically is infinity. Now, the reason it doesn't just go to infinity is because people have various options. People have limited money. People trade MNAV between companies like this. So if they have Metaplanet and it's at 10, maybe they feel like they should sell it and buy MicroStrategy at 2 MNAV. And so, there's various plays like this that are happening behind the scenes, and then the dilution rate can only be absorbed so fast, like I talked about. So this turns into certain limits, certain frictions that make MNAV only go so high, even though there's this weird sort of positive feedback loop where the higher it is, the better yield they can provide, which then justifies the higher MNAV, which then could provide better yield. So so there's reality that has to sink in as to why it doesn't just go to infinity. Everyone has a different view of what it should go, but I mean, money sets price, and price is, the stock price determines what the MNAV is. Like that's all it is. So, yeah, I think that I would be very surprised if we stay under 5, like for the rest of the year.
Wow.
I think maybe we'll pop 2 or 3 times. If some people may try to trade that and do well. I just want that to be part of how they get to these projections. And I'm a long-term holder, but I still really benefit from that sort of the volatility as vitality really comes into play with MNAV, and people haven't really talked about that specifically. They look at volatility of the stock and stuff, but the MNAV volatility is underappreciated for sure. So it doesn't need to stay high. It needs to be lively. That's best. But like my projections here, I just have it like decent levels, but fairly low, nothing too crazy. Again, because I didn't want to look insane. So
I mean, going from 5,555 Bitcoin to, on the conservative end, close to 200,000 Bitcoin is insane in most people's books, but I'm glad that you're able to justify that it's actually not that crazy with their execution and their high MNAV. What else do you have in here?
So okay. So then this ties it all together into more of the valuation side, right? So, and this is the reason I jumped in. I thought to myself, and I didn't math it out. Like in my head, I was like, okay, I know it's not going to be exactly this ratio, but I thought if they, shoot, how did I think about it? If they buy, or if they 20x their Bitcoin holdings, which it turned out to be a little more than that, but how I thought about it initially was maybe if they have a high enough MNAV, probably around 4 or 5, if you 20x your Bitcoin holdings, if you spread that out, then you'll probably 10x your Bitcoin per share. So I think that turns out to be right at like a 4.5 or 5 MNAV. But I ended up, going with kind of a better model here anyway. But that was the initial thing. So my whole reason for being in this play is it's trading at a 3 and they're going to give me 10. That's how I see it. And maybe more, maybe 20 in 2 years. So I see this Bitcoin per share multiple. So take whatever it is today. It doesn't really matter. It's just, wherever the decimals put based on how many shares exist. And conservatively, I see this 10xing in 2 years. And on a little bit stronger side, I see it doing like a 20x. And of course, this is aside from Bitcoin. So you're essentially invested, you're totally exposed to Bitcoin's upside, and downside being in Metaplanet. But then you have this sort of like growth cushion. So even if things just went sideways, oscillate up and down, let's say Bitcoin went to 150 and then 120 and just kind of, it took its time, right? If something like that happens, and even if it fell back to 100 in 2 years, this is real locked in growth that occurs behind the scenes, given my assumptions here, right? So that sort of like 10x is extremely compelling, and that's what I'm here for. It to 10x and Bitcoin to 10x on top of it. So, combined, that's pretty crazy. Normally, I'm an options guy, but this is a timeless option. It never expires. I don't have any time decay. So even as much as I love options, like this is the option now to me. So
It reminds me of that meme, right? Of that Somalian pirate, and they'd be like,
yeah.
"Yeah, we're the
Yeah,
option."
we've been spreading it. Yeah.
That's funny. Cool. What else do you have in here? Okay, so it seems as like it's my turn. I want to talk briefly on the qualitative side. And that's how you can kind of think about, the relationship between Climb and I going forward. Yes, I am technical, but Climb likes the details and he loves his models, so I would defer to him. On my side, I like to look at the qualitative side, which actually a lot of Bitcoiners don't think about. And as I mentioned before, the qualitative side is extraordinarily important. If you do not have the community behind you, and right now it is primarily retail driven, although institutions are coming fast, then you do not get that premium to NAV, and that is actually the starting vehicle that gets this wheel going. And again, as more and more Bitcoin treasury companies come up, you need that motor that is the community to continue to spread the word, to do something like what Climb and I are doing, which is to educate the broader investment community in order for this flywheel to continue. Okay, so I want to talk about the quality management. Okay, so Simon, who is the president and CEO, he has a mathematics background from Harvard. Okay, he started off his career over at Goldman Sachs as a derivatives trader, so he's very, very technically sound. Now, most people here know about Dylan LeClaire, even though Dylan is quite young. I think he's either 23 or 24. He's been around this space for quite some time. He was the head of market research at Bitcoin Magazine. He is a director over at market intelligence at UTXO Management, and he is a co-founder of 21st Paradigm. So if I was to name one sailor protege, it would be Dylan. And clearly, with 1 year track record, he's been executing on all cylinders. As another person that most people may not be familiar with is Yoshimi Abe. I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly, but I also had a chance to meet all three of these amazing people over at Strategy World. She has a very illustrious background working for Goldman Sachs for 22 years. She was head of Japanese corporate access, and she is the chief operating officer. So in my mind, Metaplanet is a small pure play Bitcoin company ran by the best in class management, besides obviously strategy. Next slide, please. Climb, why don't you talk about this?
So one thing that's cool, and I think this is also really underappreciated, I don't hear anyone talk about it really. I've posted before, like, right or wrong, some of people's complaints about MicroStrategy are the ATM. Any day that's red, check X, and people are going to blame it on the ATM. And like, I think that's largely bogus, but I mean, there's just no easy way to know. If it's a red day, are they selling new shares? Who knows, right? Because of the interesting way that these moving strike warrants work for Metaplanet, they end up only the third party kind of that they have to use to sell new shares. New shares are only sold to the market when the market is up for the day compared to yesterday's close. So I went through their April disclosures and just put everything manually into Excel and graphed it out, and this is what I came up with. So you can see the blue there is like today's high divided by yesterday's close. So basically, was the high at least positive for part of the day, I guess the best way to put it. And then the orange is the percent volume sold as new shares. So however much volume there was that day in Tokyo, how many of those were new shares that were sold? And you can see, day by day, they end up letting not too far after. I think they might do it weekly. If not, it's certainly at the end of every month. But you can like totally see under the hood what's going on, and really trust their execution, and that they're not hammering. It's not an ATM, but kind of like the idea of hammering the ATM. You can trust that they're not doing that because of the financial incentive system for the third party, essentially. So that's, I think, again, really underappreciated and like just super transparent. I think, they have to be, but like, it's really cool that they are. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and I also
I like it.
I like this next slide that you have as well.
Oh yeah. So this is cool. And like, people can make of this what they will, but they have this on their analytics part of their website with everything else. And the orange dots are when they buy Bitcoin. And so you can see the prices. Well, I looked through, and I mean, none of them were over 100K, even though we were over 100K quite a bit, over the last few months, before things dipped. And again, maybe they're just really, really lucky, but like hearing Dylan, and now Simon talk about things, the way that they are careful about not hammering the 18, like not hammering, new shares on the market, letting MNAV breathe. And then, yeah, I mean, that's basically it. But just their timing here is impressive. Like, that's like a smiley face, within the last couple of months, you can kind of see all the orange dots where they bought the dip. So I like that. Like, that's huge. I mean, they started the year with 1,700 Bitcoin, and they have, 5,555 now. So they've tripled it, and they've been careful about when they buy. So yeah, that's super cool.
Amazing. Next slide, please. So, I want to talk about, again, on the qualitative side, right? They for many people who don't know, they've only started this a little bit over a year ago, and this was shared during the Strategy World conference, when Simon was talking about how the very first shareholder meeting, they were able to only fill, that tiny little room that you see up there. Okay. I think it was like less than 10 shareholders. Just a single year later, they've packed out a whole entire auditorium. Okay. So clearly they're doing something right. And again, if you understand the Japanese market, if you look at the stock market, it's been flat for many decades, and that's because they debase their currencies aggressively, and also recently, the bond market has been taking a hit. So, yield, it's a very yield-starved environment as well. So the macroeconomics really align well for the Japanese market to have a strong Bitcoin company like Metaplanet. Next slide, please. And again, this is going back to their fan base, and this is something that I will continue to harp on, is the importance of community. And for those who don't believe that, look at MSTR True North and what they have done for the stock, right? It helps educate the masses, the retail investors, who are the first investors to give capital to this company and therefore drive MNAV. This is crazy. Just anecdotally, I was at Strategy World and Simon and Dylan gave me this hat, right? And I thought it was just a cool hat. And I started wearing around the conference. And there were so many people that came up to me and they're like, do you work for Metaplanet? Like, how'd you get that hat? Funny enough, I was at breakfast with Grain of Salt and Jesse Myers, and Jesse Myers literally stopped Grain like mid-sentence, and he was just like, how'd you get that hat? It's like a rare collector's item. I was like, I didn't even know. And then I went back and looked on eBay, and they were selling for almost $400 for free merch. So clearly they're doing something right on the community side. Next slide, please. Also, they're doing something extremely smart on the marketing / strategic partnership side. Okay, they announced that Eric Trump is now part of the strategic advisory board, and obviously with the first pro-crypto, first pro-Bitcoin president in Donald Trump, this is very bullish. And for those who don't know, they are also launched a U.S. subsidiary for Metaplanet. Next slide. Also, they announced that they're teaming up with David Bailey, who is the head of Bitcoin Magazine. And again, I want to emphasize that the reason why Bitcoin Magazine is such a large presence in the Bitcoin space is that there are one of the few Bitcoin-related companies who understand marketing and distribution. Through Bitcoin Magazine, they have now Bitcoin for Corporations, they have UTXO Management, and a slew of other ventures because they understand marketing and distribution. Okay, and then there's not a slide here, but they also understand marketing. They recently hired Miss Japan to do community outreach to both the U.S. speakers and, more importantly, the Japanese speakers as well. So yeah, that's it. That's effectively our investment thesis, is that not only are they executing and have shown a track record of strong execution for the past year, but they have still a very long runway ahead, and that is driven by obviously the execution, the management, but then also the strategic partnerships, and you and I, the retail community. Climb, is there anything that you would like to add before we maybe look for some Q&A questions? And if people want to ask Climb and I some questions, again, don't be afraid to ask those questions in the chat. We will try to pull them up.
Yeah, and there's plenty of things that I just won't really be able to ask. I know I saw someone ask about a U.S. subsidiary and uplisting and stuff like that. I don't have a background that would really inform me anything about that. So we talk about a lot of that stuff in the Discord if people aren't in there. But yeah, we definitely have a lot of back and forth, and some people that know much better than I would.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, Climb and I are talking about, what does episode 2 look like? So again, for those who are live in the chat, we would like to hear what you want from us going forward. But what we are thinking is Dylan wrote a beautiful 27-page research paper. If you want, between now and next week, for us to do this live spaces, to read that along with us, you're more than welcome to. But Climb and I are going to break that down systematically to tell you and peek into the mind of how, Dylan, who's the head of Bitcoin strategy, is thinking about how their Bitcoin acquisition strategy. And then we'll also be pulling various other sources like, Tim Kotzman's amazing Bitcoin Treasury podcast with Dylan and other resources as well to give you the investment thesis. If there is more time after that, I know that there are people in the chat who are asking, how does this company, this Bitcoin Treasury company, compare to all these other Bitcoin Treasury companies that are popping up? I think that's a very interesting question. But again, it's something that Climb and I will break down. In the meantime, let us know what you have in the chat. Again, thank you so much for your support. This is the very first of many Metaplanet Madness live spaces. This will be reposted onto YouTube, and then eventually the audio portion will be on Spotify. And then I'm also working diligently to figure out if there is a way to convert this English speaking into AI for the Japanese community. So Climb, do you have any closing remarks before we go off?
Anything like any charts and stuff shared here, I'll try to make a thread after this, and just in case people want those charts, they'll be there, and I might type up something about each one, so you'll have that too.
Yes, obviously, if you haven't followed Climb yet, make sure you do. Again, his handle is actually Climber. And then my handle, if you want to follow along, is BTC Bullrider. Thank you guys so much for your time. This has been a wildly successful first episode. I do apologize for the commotion earlier on the back. I hope that won't happen down the road. But again, thank you for bearing with us. Please, if you have any feedback, slide into our DMs. We're always looking to add value to the Metaplanet community. And until then, we will see you guys next week. All right, take care, guys. Bye.